He's not dead. Little girl stops Mafia boss's funeral to save him. What happened next shocked. At a funeral packed with dangerous men, one young woman dares to scream the impossible. The Mafia boss in the coffin isn't dead. The room erupts in chaos. Guns rise. Eyes burn into her. But when the coffin is opened, the unthinkable is true. He's alive. She saves him in front of the entire underworld. And in that moment, she signs her own death sentence. Dragged into his mansion, she thinks she can walk away. But when his enemies come for her, she learns the truth. No one escapes a man like him. He's ruthless to the world, but to her, he's something else dangerous, obsessed, and willing to burn the city to ash to keep her. But with traitors hiding in the shadows, and her own family's blood tied to betrayal, the real shock is still to come. So the question is, when you save the devil himself from death, do you become his salvation or his possession forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The cathedral's vaulted ceiling loomed overhead, its ancient stones bearing witness to countless prayers and confessions. Today, they watched over a different kind of gathering, one where wooden rosaries shared space with concealed weapons, and where whispered prayers mingled with hushed talk of territory and vengeance. From her position in the last pew, she observed the sea of black suits and carefully controlled expressions. The air felt thick with incense and unspoken tension. Every major family had sent representatives to pay their respects to Dante Moretti, the man they called Il Fantasma, the ghost. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, his medical lectures rising unbidden. "Death has tells," he'd always said. "The body speaks its truth even in silence." Those lessons had been drilled into her during countless hours at his clinic before cancer took him just 3 months ago. The ornate coffin sat at the altar like a throne, lid partially open to display its occupant. Even in death, Dante Moretti commanded attention. His sharp features, carved from Italian marble, remained unmarred by whatever had supposedly killed him. Too unmarred, her trained eye noticed. Too perfect, something wasn't right. She leaned forward, straining to see better. The distance was significant, but years of observation at her father's side had honed her instincts. The skin tone wasn't quite right for a corpse of 2 days. There was no hint of livor mortis, no settling of fluids that should have been visible even under mortician's makeup. Then she saw it, the smallest rise of his chest beneath the perfectly tailored suit. Her heart stopped, then exploded into a frantic rhythm. He was breathing. It was subtle, controlled, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Dante Moretti wasn't dead. He was playing dead. And an entire cathedral of armed mafia soldiers was buying it. Fear gripped her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. This man's games were far above her pay grade. But her father's voice whispered again, "Knowledge brings responsibility. What you know can save lives or end them." Before she could second-guess herself, she was moving. Her heels clicked against the stone floor as she rushed forward, ignoring the sharp looks and reaching hands of the guards positioned along the aisle. Someone grabbed her arm, but she twisted free. "Stop!" she called out, her voice echoing off the ancient stones. "Stop the service!" The priest paused mid-prayer, his Latin falling silent as heads turned toward her. She reached the coffin, placing her palms flat against the polished wood. The nearest guards moved forward, but uncertainty stayed their hands. No one had planned for this kind of interruption. "He's not dead," she announced, her voice carrying through the stunned silence. "Dante Moretti is alive." Murmurs erupted through the congregation. She saw hands sliding beneath jackets, reaching for weapons. The priest looked to the front row, where men she assumed were Moretti's captains sat with thunderous expressions. "Young lady," the priest began, "this is highly inappropriate." "Look." She moved to the head of the coffin, hands steady despite her racing heart. "Watch his chest. He's breathing." Someone in the front row stood a broad-shouldered man with steel gray hair. "Remove her," he ordered, voice tight with barely contained rage. "No!" She reached for the coffin lid. "Just look! You're burying a living man!" Her fingers found the edge of the lid just as 2 guards reached her. She pushed it wider, fully exposing Dante's face to the congregation. The guards' hands clamped down on her shoulders, but not before everyone saw what she saw, the undeniable rise and fall of his chest. Gasps rippled through the cathedral. The gray-haired man stepped forward, his face draining of color. The priest crossed himself, stumbling back from the altar. And then, as if summoned by their collective shock, Dante Moretti's eyes fluttered open, dark irises, sharp as obsidian, focused immediately on her face. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but danger radiated from him like heat from a furnace. The guard's hands fell away from her shoulders as if burned. Dante's chest rose with his first unconcealed breath. His head turned slightly, taking in the scene, the shocked faces, the drawn weapons, the abandoned prayer book on the altar. Then his gaze returned to her, pinning her in place like a butterfly to a board. "Who the hell are you?" His voice was raw, barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. She stood frozen, caught between his dark stare and the hundreds of eyes boring into her back. In saving him or exposing him, she had just made herself the center of attention for every major criminal family in the city. And most importantly, she had the complete attention of Dante Moretti himself, a man whose funeral she had just ruined. The cathedral's silence pressed in, waiting for her answer. But as she opened her mouth to speak, she realized that her own fate had been sealed the moment she'd seen that first breath. There was no going back now, no pretending she hadn't seen what she'd seen. She had chosen to act on the truth, and now she would have to face whatever consequences came with that choice. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral's side chamber burst open as Dante Moretti's men carried their barely conscious Dawn inside. The heroine followed close behind, practically dragged by two suited guards who maintained iron grips on her arms. Her protests echoed off the stone walls as they deposited their boss onto an antique chaise lounge. "He needs a doctor," she insisted, struggling against the hands restraining her. "His pulse is weak and his breathing is shallow. I can call my colleague." "Silence," one of the older capos commanded, his silver hair catching the light from the stained glass windows. "No outsiders." The room buzzed with tension as Dante's men circled protectively around him. Some spoke in rapid Italian, while others barked orders into phones. The heroine watched as color slowly returned to Dante's face, his chest rising and falling more steadily now. His dark eyes flickered open, focusing with predatory intensity despite his weakened state. "Isabella Russo," he whispered, his voice hoarse but carrying an authority that immediately silenced the room. She froze, shock coursing through her veins. "How do you know my name?" A ghost of a smile played across his lips. "Your father, Marco Russo, the doctor who saved my life 6 years ago when a bullet nearly took everything." His gaze never left her face. "I never forget a debt." "Then consider it repaid," Isabella said firmly. "I stopped them from burying. You, alive. We're even." Dante's laugh was low and dangerous. "That's not how this works, Piccola. Your father saved my life, and now you've done the same. The Moretti family's obligation has doubled." He pushed himself to sitting position, ignoring his men's protests. "You're my responsibility now." "I don't want or need your protection," Isabella snapped, finally wrenching free of the guards. "I'm a doctor, not some mafia princess to be claimed." The room went deadly quiet at her outburst. Several men reached for their weapons, but Dante raised one hand in a silent command that had immediate effect. The power he wielded even from a position of weakness was magnetic, dangerous, and Isabella hated to admit compelling. "You don't understand the forces at play," Dante said, his voice soft but lined with steel. "Someone tried to bury me alive today. They'll come for anyone connected to my survival." His dark eyes bore into her, including the woman who exposed their plan. Hours later, after being shown to a luxurious suite in the Moretti mansion, Isabella paced like a caged animal. The room was beautiful, all cream silk and crystal chandeliers, but it felt like a prison. She had patients who needed her, a life that didn't involve armed guards and mafia politics. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. Isabella pressed her ear to the heavy wooden door, listening for movement. When she heard nothing but silence, she eased it open and slipped into the darkened corridor. Her heart thundered in her chest as she navigated the maze-like halls, thanking whatever deity was listening that she'd thought to memorize the path during her earlier escort to the room. Getting past the interior guards proved surprisingly easy, too easy, she realized later. They were stationed predictably, and the shadows provided ample cover. Within minutes, she reached the mansion's wrought iron gates. Freedom beckoned just beyond them. The first gunshot shattered the night's silence. Isabella ducked instinctively as more shots followed, accompanied by shouts and the sound of running feet. Dark figures emerged from behind the trees lining the street, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. Before she could process what was happening, a strong arm wrapped around her waist, yanking her backward. The familiar scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder filled her senses as Dante Moretti pressed her against his chest, his gun arm extended. Two sharp cracks split the air, and two attackers crumpled to the ground. "Inside! Now!" he growled, practically lifting her off her feet as he dragged her back toward the mansion. His body shielded her from the continuing gunfire as his men emerged from their positions, engaging the remaining assailants. Once they were back in the marble-floored foyer, Dante spun her around to face him. His eyes blazed with fury, but something else lurked beneath concern, possessiveness, a dangerous cocktail of emotions that made Isabella's breath catch. "You don't get to walk away now," he snarled, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Those men weren't there by accident. They were waiting for you, waiting to eliminate the witness who ruined their carefully laid plans." His fingers tightened fractionally. "Do you understand what that means? You're in this whether you want to be or not." Isabella stared up at him, her heart racing for more than just the attack. The raw power emanating from him was intoxicating, terrifying. She could feel the heat of his body, see the barely contained violence in his stance. This was the man they called Il Fantasma, the ghost who haunted Italy's criminal underworld. And somehow, in the space of a single day, she had become inextricably bound to him. The sound of gunfire had ceased outside, replaced by the efficient movements of Dante's men securing the perimeter. But Isabella barely noticed. She was caught in Dante's gravity, understanding for the first time that her life had irreversibly changed the moment she'd stopped his funeral. The morning sun spilled through ornate windows, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet of her gilded prison. She stood at the window, watching guards patrol the mansion's grounds below, a stark reminder that the luxury surrounding her was just another kind of cage. The room itself was bigger than her entire apartment, decorated with antique furniture that probably cost more than her college tuition. The click of the door lock made her spin around. Dante Moretti stepped inside, his presence filling the space with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. He'd traded yesterday's funeral suit for a crisp black shirt and tailored pants, but dark circles under his eyes betrayed his recent brush with death. "Why did you do it?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Why risk your life in a room full of armed men?" She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Because it was the right thing to do. My father taught me to recognize the signs: shallow breathing, slight muscle movements. I couldn't just watch someone be buried alive." "Your father," Dante's jaw tightened. "The doctor who saved my life years ago, and now his daughter saves me again." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I stopped a murder," she shot back. "No." He reached out, catching her chin between his thumb and forefinger. "You've painted a target on your back. Every enemy I have now knows your face, knows you exposed their plan." His touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with the harshness of his words. "They will come for you." The reality of his words hit her like a physical blow. Her knees weakened, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. "My classes, my friends, your old life is over." Dante's voice held no sympathy, only cold truth. "The moment you stepped forward in that church, you stepped into my world. There's no going back." She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "I was just trying to help, and now I have to help you." He moved to the window, his broad shoulders blocking out the sunlight. "Your father saved my life once. I repaid that debt by protecting his family after his death. But this?" He turned back to her, his dark eyes intense. "This creates a new debt entirely." The day passed in a haze of shock and denial. She paced the room, tried reading books from the shelves, anything to distract herself from the guard's constant presence outside her door. As evening approached, a maid arrived with a dress black, elegant, clearly expensive. "The Dawn requests your presence at dinner," the maid announced, laying out the dress. She considered refusing, but something told her that wasn't an option. When she entered the dining room an hour later, Dante stood at the head of a massive table set for two. Crystal glasses caught the light from a chandelier overhead, and silver place settings gleamed against dark tablecloths. "Sit." It wasn't a request. She took her place, noting how the table's length couldn't diminish his commanding presence. The first course arrived, some kind of delicate soup she barely tasted. "You'll be staying here indefinitely," Dante stated between sips of wine. "My enemies will be watching your apartment, your school, anywhere you might go." "You can't just keep me prisoner," she snapped, her spoon clattering against fine china. His laugh was low without humor. Prisoner? Look around you. This isn't a prison, it's protection. Protection you need because of your own actions. I saved your life. And now I'm saving yours. He leaned forward, his intensity making her pulse jump. Do you think I enjoy this? Having to reorganize my entire security because some stubborn girl couldn't mind her own business? The main course arrived, perfectly cooked steak she couldn't stomach. Each bite felt like ash in her mouth as anger and fear warred inside her. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Throwing down her napkin, she stood. I'm not hungry. Sit down. His voice could have frozen hell. No. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against marble floors. She half expected him to stop her, to grab her arm or call for guards. Instead, she heard only his voice, soft but carrying clearly across the room. She thinks she can run from me. The words followed her down the hallway, settling like ice in her stomach. Because deep down, she knew there was nowhere left to run. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, its deep chimes echoing through the mansion's dark corridors. She pressed herself against the wall, heart thundering as voices drifted from Dante's study. The door was cracked open just enough for slivers of lamplight to escape, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The funeral was perfect timing. Dante's voice carried through the gap, until she intervened. She held her breath, inching closer to hear better. The rich scent of cigars and whiskey wafted from the room, along with the low murmur of multiple men's voices. We needed that funeral to flush out the rat, another man growled. Months of planning, wasted. Not wasted. Dante's tone turned sharp, cutting through the grumbling. The ambush came earlier than we anticipated. Someone leaked our timeline proof there's a traitor among us. Her fingers pressed against the wallpaper as she leaned in. The sound of ice clinking in glasses and leather chairs creaking filled the pause. The question is who? A third voice added. Who knew enough to warn our enemies? Everyone in this room knew, Dante said, along with 6 others. One of them sold me out. The floor creaked beneath her foot as she shifted her weight. Before she could retreat, strong hands grabbed her arms from behind. She tried to cry out, but a palm clamped over her mouth as she was dragged into the study. Look what we found, growled the guard holding her. A little spy in the hallway. The room fell silent. 5 men in expensive suits sat in leather chairs arranged around Dante's massive desk. Their faces hardened as they looked at her, hands moving toward concealed weapons. But it was Dante's expression that made her blood run cold, his dark eyes blazing with something between fury and fascination. Let her go, he ordered quietly. The guard's grip loosened immediately. Instead of dismissing her, Dante beckoned her closer. Sit. He gestured to an empty chair beside his desk. When she hesitated, his jaw tightened. Now. She sank into the leather seat, painfully aware of the hostile stares from his underbosses. The air felt thick with cigar smoke and suspicion. Boss, you can't be serious, one of the men protested. She could be working for... Enough. Dante's voice could have frozen fire. She stays. The man fell silent, but his eyes burned with mistrust. She could feel the tension crackling through the room. These men weren't used to having their judgment questioned, especially not for an outsider. Dante continued as if nothing had happened. The ambush was coordinated, professional. They knew exactly when to strike. His fingers drummed once on the desk, which means our leak has access to the inner circle. She watched the men exchange wary glances, decades of loyalty suddenly clouded by doubt. This was how Dante's world worked, trust and suspicion balanced on a knife's edge. And what about her? Another underboss nodded in her direction. She shows up at exactly the right moment to expose you. Convenient, isn't it? She saved my life, Dante said flatly. While you were all ready to bury me alive? The words hung in the air like smoke. She saw something flicker across the men's faces. Shame, perhaps. Or fear. They hadn't known their boss was alive in that coffin. The thought made her shiver. The girl stays under my protection, Dante continued. Anyone who questions that answers to me. His tone left no room for argument. The underbosses nodded, though she could see the reluctance in their stiff shoulders. The meeting continued, but she barely heard the words. She was too busy studying the dynamics playing out before her. The way these hardened criminals deferred to Dante's every gesture. How loyalty and fear intertwined in every interaction. This was power in its rawest form, the kind that commanded life and death with a single word. Hours later, she stood at her bedroom window, unable to sleep. The mansion's grounds stretched out below, Perfectly manicured lawns and gardens now shrouded in darkness. A movement caught her eye, twin pinpoints of light in the distance, just beyond the property's iron gates. Headlights. As she watched, another pair appeared further down the road. Then another. They sat there in the darkness, patient and predatory, like wolves circling their prey. Her throat went dry as the reality of her situation crashed over her. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching her breath fog the window. What have I done? The whispered words seemed to echo in the empty room, carrying the weight of everything she'd lost, her freedom, her safety, her normal life. The headlights continued their silent vigil, a reminder that Dante's enemies were watching, waiting, and she was now caught in their crosshairs, whether she wanted to be or not. Her world had shrunk to the confines of this mansion and the dangerous man who ruled it. There was no going back to who she was before she'd rushed forward in that cathedral. That life was gone, replaced by something darker, more complex, and infinitely more dangerous. Sunlight spilled through heavy brocade curtains, painting golden stripes across her bed. She stirred, disoriented by the unfamiliar silk sheets and massive four-poster bed. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until heavy boots echoed in the hallway outside her door. The Moretti mansion was alive with activity. Guards marched past her room in pairs, their weapons visible beneath. Tailored suit jackets. Voices called out commands in rapid Italian, and somewhere, a door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. She slipped from bed, wrapping herself in the plush robe someone had left draped across a chair. The marble floor was cold beneath her feet as she crept to her door, easing it open just enough to peer out. 2 new guards stood at attention, their faces stern. "Miss," one nodded respectfully. "The boss wants you to stay in your room this morning." "I need to leave," she insisted, stepping into the hallway. "I have classes, a life." "Not anymore." Dante's voice cut through the corridor like steel. He strode toward them, his presence commanding every inch of space. Maps were clutched in one hand, a gleaming pistol visible at his hip. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze was sharp as ever. "You can't keep me prisoner here," she challenged, lifting her chin despite the way her pulse quickened at his nearness. His laugh was low, dangerous. "Prisoner? Look around, Bella. This isn't a prison. It's protection. But since you're so eager to explore," he gestured to the hallway ahead, "the mansion is yours. Giovanni will accompany you." A older guard stepped forward, his weathered face kind despite the weapon at his side. She recognized the calculated move, giving her an illusion of freedom while keeping her firmly under watch. "I don't need a babysitter," she muttered. Dante stepped closer, close enough that she caught the scent of his cologne mixed with gunpowder. "What you need is to stay alive. Take the compromise, or stay in your room. Your choice." Before she could argue further, he turned on his heel and stalked away, disappearing into his study where more maps and weapons were spread across his massive desk. Through the open door, she glimpsed other men in suits, their faces grim as they bent over papers. "Shall we begin the tour, miss?" Giovanni's voice was gentle, his Italian accent thick but warm. Realizing it was her best option, she nodded. Giovanni led her through the mansion's winding corridors, each more opulent than the last. Crystal chandeliers dripped from coffered ceilings, priceless art-lined walls covered in silk damask. Every surface gleamed with old money and older power. The kitchen was a revelation of marble and copper, where a plump woman named Maria immediately insisted on feeding her. "Too skinny," she clucked, pushing a plate of fresh pastries across the counter. "The boss says you must eat." In the library, leather-bound books stretched floor to ceiling, the air rich with the scent of paper and wood polish. She trailed her fingers along spines written in multiple languages, surprised to find worn paperbacks mixed among first editions. Throughout their tour, Giovanni shared stories of the house, his voice softening when he spoke of Dante as a boy. "He was different then," the old guard mused. "Before his father, before his brother's death, still had light in his eyes. As if summoned by his name, Dante appeared in the doorway of the conservatory as they passed. He was speaking quietly to an elderly woman who must have been well into her 80s, her silver hair elegant in a twist. To the heroine's shock, Dante bent to kiss the woman's cheek with genuine tenderness, his hard face transforming for just a moment. "That's Rosa," Giovanni whispered. "Raised him after his mother died, only one who can still scold him and live to tell about it." The day stretched on, a strange dance of luxury and danger. Guards patrolled every corner, but fresh flowers filled crystal vases. Weapons were cleaned in rooms decorated with priceless antiques. The contrast made her head spin. As evening fell, she retreated to her room, mind whirling with everything she'd seen. The knock at her door surprised her. Even more surprising was Dante himself, holding a silver dinner tray. "You missed dinner?" he said gruffly, setting the tray on a small table. Maria insisted. She approached cautiously, aware of how he filled the space, how the air seemed to crackle between them. When she reached for the silver cover, their hands brushed. The contact was electric, sending sparks racing up her arm. For a heartbeat they both froze. His fingers were warm against hers, calloused from weapons but surprisingly gentle. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and found them dark with something that wasn't anger. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Here, in the soft lamplight, with his guard lowered just slightly, she caught a glimpse of the man behind the monster. His jaw wasn't quite so hard, his shoulders not quite so rigid. He looked almost human. Then he pulled away, the mask sliding back into place. Without another word, he turned and left, closing the door quietly behind him. She stared at her tingling fingers, wondering how the same hands that dealt death could leave such warmth behind. The pulsing bass from the underground club vibrated through her bones as they descended the narrow staircase. 1 week of being trapped in the Moretti mansion had left her desperate for a change of scenery. When she'd overheard Dante mentioning a visit to Il Sotterraneo, his exclusive nightclub, she'd practically begged to come along. "Stay close," Dante ordered, his hand pressing against her lower back as they entered the dimly lit space. The club oozed luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast shadowy patterns across dark leather booths, while well-dressed patrons sipped drinks worth more than most people's weekly salary. His presence commanded immediate attention. Conversations hushed, heads bowed respectfully as he passed. She felt the weight of curious stares, everyone wondering who dared walk so close to Il Fantasma, the ghost who had risen from his own funeral. "You shouldn't be here," Dante muttered, guiding her toward a private booth overlooking the dance floor. "It's not safe. Nothing about my life is safe anymore," she countered, sliding into the plush seat. "At least here, I can pretend to be normal for a few hours." His dark eyes studied her face, something unreadable flickering in their depths. Before he could respond, one of his captains approached with urgent news. Dante's expression hardened as he listened, his jaw clenching. The first gunshot shattered a mirror behind the bar. Chaos erupted instantly. Screams pierced the air as patrons scrambled for exits. Dante moved with lethal grace, shoving her behind him while drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. 3 masked men had emerged from the crowd, guns blazing. "Down!" Dante roared, pushing her beneath the table. The sound of his gun firing was deafening in the enclosed space. She watched, paralyzed, as the first attacker fell, blood blooming across his chest. Dante's men swarmed the room, but he never left her side. His movements were precise, brutal, nothing like the controlled businessman she'd seen this past week. This was the monster everyone feared, dealing death with terrifying efficiency. A second attacker tried flanking them. Dante caught him by the throat, slammed him against the wall, and fired point blank. The spray of red misted across his expensive suit, but his expression never changed. The third man managed to get closer, squeezing off 2 shots that splintered the wooden table above her head. Dante's response was immediate and savage. He launched himself forward, tackling the shooter. They grappled briefly before Dante's knife flashed in the strobing lights. The attacker went still. "Come," Dante commanded, hauling her up. His arm wrapped around her waist, pressing her close as he half carried her toward a hidden exit. Her legs trembled, adrenaline making everything seem surreal. They emerged in a back alley where an unmicled car waited. Dante practically threw her inside before sliding in after her. "Drive," he barked to the waiting driver. The engine roared to life. Only then did Dante turn to her, his hands rough as they checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" His voice was raw, almost angry. When she shook her head, he gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Look at me. Are you scared now that you've seen what I really am?" Blood still stained his hands, spattered across his face like war paint. But it was the wild darkness in his eyes that made her breath catch. Possessive, protective, and utterly dangerous. "Only when you look at me like that," she whispered. His fingers tightened briefly before he released her, turning to stare out the window. The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. Back at the mansion, she followed him to his private study. He stood at the sink in the adjoining bathroom, mechanically washing blood from his hands. The water ran pink, then clear, but he kept scrubbing. She grabbed a soft towel from the rack, approaching slowly. His shoulders were rigid with tension, his knuckles white where they gripped the porcelain. When she touched his arm, he went completely still. "Here," she offered quietly, holding out the towel. He turned, water dripping from his fingers, and their eyes met in the mirror. The air between them crackled with something electric, dangerous. His gaze dropped to her lips, then snapped back up, burning with an intensity that made her shiver. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the gunpowder and expensive cologne that clung to his skin. Neither moved. They stood frozen in that moment, balanced on a knife's edge between violence and desire. His breath came faster, chest rising and falling beneath his ruined suit. She watched a drop of water trail down his wrist, falling to shatter against the marble floor. The towel hung forgotten between them, a flimsy barrier against the magnetic pull drawing them closer. His eyes had gone dark as midnight, pupils blown wide with something that looked like hunger. She could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched as though fighting the urge to reach for her. The tension stretched, electric and dangerous, until the very air seemed to hum with unspoken possibilities. Moonlight filtered through the study's tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and leather-bound books. The heavy scent of whiskey hung in the air as Dante slouched in his leather chair, crystal tumbler dangling from his fingers. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, tie hanging loose around his neck, white shirt still stained with dried blood from the club shootout. She hesitated in the doorway, watching him stare unseeing into the amber liquid. The events at the club had shaken them both, but something deeper seemed to haunt him tonight. The weight of his empire, usually worn like armor, now seemed to crush him. "Are you going to stand there all night?" His voice was rough, weighted with alcohol and exhaustion. She stepped into the study, bare feet silent on the expensive carpets. "I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing their faces. The men you killed." Dante's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Get used to it, Kara. Death follows me like a shadow." He drained his glass, immediately reaching for the crystal decanter to pour another. His hands trembled slightly, something she'd never seen before. "Talk to me," she whispered, perching on the arm of his chair. "Whatever's eating at you tonight, share it." For long moments, only the tick of the antique clock filled the silence. Then Dante spoke, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear. "Today, the way I protected you, my brother used to do the same for me." The admission seemed to crack something open inside him. Words spilled out, shaped by whiskey and darkness. He told her of growing up under his father's iron fist, a man who believed kindness was weakness, who beat obedience into his sons with belt and fist. Of his older brother Marco, who would take the worst punishments to shield young Dante. "Marco was everything I'm not," Dante continued, staring into his drink. "Strong but gentle, ruthless in business but never cruel. He would have led the family better than me." His knuckles whitened around the glass. "They shot him 17 times, left his body on our doorstep as a message." She reached out, fingers brushing his shoulder. He flinched but didn't pull away. "That's when I became what they feared," he said. "The ghost, the monster. I hunted every man responsible, made examples so brutal that no one would dare touch what's mine again." His eyes finally met hers, dark with pain and something fiercer, but it didn't bring him back. Nothing brings back the dead. Without thinking, she cupped his face in her hands. "You're not a monster, Dante. You're a man who survived, who protected himself the only way he knew how." "You don't know what I am," he growled, but his hands came up to grip her wrists, holding her there instead of pushing her away. "I see you," she whispered. "The boy who lost everything, the man who built an empire from ashes, the Don who kills to protect what's his." Her thumb traced his cheekbone. "I see all of you." Something broke in his expression. He surged forward, capturing her lips in a desperate kiss that tasted of whiskey and need. She gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until she was drowning in him. His hands tangled in her hair as he pulled her into his lap. The kiss turned hungry, devouring. All the tension between them since that first moment in the cathedral exploded into raw passion. She pressed closer, feeling the hard planes of his chest through the blood-stained shirt. "Tell me to stop," he breathed against her throat, but his hands were already sliding under her nightgown, leaving trails of fire on her skin. No, she moaned as his teeth grazed her pulse point. Don't stop. They barely made it to his bedroom, leaving a trail of discarded clothing in their wake. He took her against the wall first, unable to wait for the bed. Then again, on silk sheets, slower this time but no less intense. Each touch erased another ghost. Each kiss burned away another shadow. Hours passed in a blur of passion and pleasure. They mapped each other's bodies with hands and lips, learning every scar, every sensitive spot. She discovered the bullet wound on his shoulder, the knife scar along his ribs. He kissed the small birth Michael on her hip like it was precious. As dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, she lay beside him, tracing the elaborate tattoo that covered his back, a phoenix rising from flames. Dante's breathing had finally evened out into the deep rhythm of true sleep. In slumber, the hard lines of his face softened, making him look younger, unburdened. She wondered if anyone else had ever seen him like this. Vulnerable, peaceful, his guard completely down. The thought made her heart ache. This dangerous man, this feared Dawn, slept beside her like a child seeking comfort after nightmares. Her fingers continued their gentle exploration of his scars, each one telling a story of survival. Outside, the city was waking up, but in this room, time seemed suspended. For these precious moments, there were no rivals plotting, no empire to maintain, no blood to shed, just them, tangled in silk sheets, finding something neither expected, peace in the eye of the storm. The peace of the mansion shattered like glass on a marble floor. Isabella heard the commotion before she saw it, shouts and the sound of struggling from the basement level, where Dante conducted his darker business. Her heart jumped into her throat when she recognized his voice, deeper and more menacing than she'd ever heard it. "Bring him up, now!" Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Two of Dante's men dragged a bloodied figure between them, his feet barely touching the ground. The messenger's face was swollen, but his eyes darted around wildly, seeking escape where there was none. Dante followed, his suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms mickled with fresh scratches. His expression was carved from stone. "Take him to my office." Isabella pressed herself against the wall as they passed, the metallic scent of blood making her stomach turn. She'd grown used to violence in the past weeks, but this felt different, more personal. The air crackled with Dante's contained fury. Hours passed. She paced the library, trying to focus on a book but unable to ignore the muffled sounds from above. When silence finally fell, it was somehow worse. Dante found her there as sunset painted the room in shades of blood. His face was ashen, his eyes holding something she'd never seen before, reluctance. "We need to talk." His voice was gentle. That scared her more than his rage. She followed him to his office, where papers were spread across his desk. The messenger was gone, but evidence of interrogation remained in dark stains on the floor. The messenger broke. Dante's words fell like stones. "We have the name of the traitor." Isabella's throat went dry. "Who?" "Your brother, Michael." The world tilted sideways. She grabbed the edge of Dante's desk to steady herself. "No, that's impossible. Michael would never—" "Isabella." Dante's voice was firm, but not unkind. He spread out documents, bank statements, photographs, coded messages. He's been feeding information to the Rossi family for months. The attack at my funeral, the ambush at the club, he orchestrated all of it. She stared at the evidence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Photos of Michael meeting with known Rossi associates, money trails leading to offshore accounts, his signature on documents that proved his betrayal. "He's my brother," she whispered. "He raised me after our parents died. He wouldn't—" The messenger confirmed everything under torture. Dante moved closer, but didn't touch her. "I'm sorry, Isabella, but your brother has been playing both sides." Rage replaced shock. She snatched up the photos, throwing them across the room. "You're wrong. This is a setup. Michael protects people. He's a lawyer, for God's sake." "The perfect cover," Dante said softly. "Who would suspect a corporate attorney of selling Mafia secrets?" Isabella ran. Out of the office, down the mansion's winding halls, ignoring Dante's shouts behind her. She had to find Michael, had to hear the truth from his own lips. Her phone was in her hand before she reached the front door, dialing his number from memory. He answered on the second ring. "Isabella, are you okay?" "Meet me," she gasped. "Please, it's important." "The coffee shop on 5th, he said immediately. 20 minutes. She dodged Dante's security, slipping out through the garden gate she'd discovered during her explorations. The streets blurred as she ran, her mind a chaos of denial and desperate hope. It couldn't be true. Not Michael, not her anchor, her protector, her only family. The coffee shop was quiet. Afternoon crowds long gone. Michael sat at a corner table, looking exactly as he always did. Neat suit, concerned expression, gold wedding ring catching the light. Normal, safe, familiar. She never made it to his table. Rough hands grabbed her from behind. A cloth pressed over her mouth and nose, sweet-smelling chemicals flooding her lungs. Through dimming vision, she saw Michael stand not to help her, but to hold the door for the men dragging her away. The betrayal in that simple gesture hurt more than the hands restraining her. She woke to darkness and the scratch of rope against her wrists. A warehouse, she thought dimly, recognizing the echoing space and the smell of rust and sea air. Her ankles were bound, a gag cutting into the corners of her mouth. Footsteps approached, Michael's voice, discussing payment with someone whose accent Michaeled him as Rossi family. Her brother, her protector, had sold her like cargo. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she focused on the warmth in her chest, the memory of Dante's arms around her, his fierce protectiveness, his unwavering certainty. He would come. He would paint this warehouse in blood to reach her. The thought should have horrified her, but instead it felt like a prayer, a promise, a lifeline in the darkness. "Dante will come for me," she whispered against the gag, the words barely audible even to herself. "He has to." The mansion's grand foyer echoed with the sound of shattering crystal. Dante's glass exploded against the marble wall, amber whiskey dripping down like tears. His men flinched, backing away from the fury radiating off their boss in savage waves. "Find her." His voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded massacres. "Turn this city inside out. I want every street, every building, every rat hole searched." His fingers curled into fists, knuckles white with strain. "Nobody sleeps until she's back where she belongs." Marco, his most trusted captain, stepped forward cautiously. "Boss, we've already sent teams to—" "Not enough!" Dante roared, sweeping a crystal decanter off the nearby table. It crashed to the floor, the sound like breaking bones. "I want every soldier, every associate, every connection we have searching. I don't care if you have to wake the dead. Find her." The men scattered like leaves in a storm, phones already pressed to their ears as they relayed orders. Dante stood alone in the destruction, chest heaving, dark eyes wild with something beyond rage fear. Raw, primal fear that clawed at his insides. Hours bled into a brutal symphony of violence. Dante personally led raids on known enemy territories, his usual calculated precision replaced by methodical devastation. 3 rival safe houses burned to ash. Their screams meant nothing, they didn't have her. In a grimy warehouse by the docks, Dante pressed his gun to a rival soldier's temple. "Where is she?" Blood dripped from his knuckles, testament to how long he'd been asking. The man whimpered, shaking his head. "I swear, I don't." The words died in a gurgle as Dante's hand closed around his throat. "Wrong answer." His voice was ice, his eyes blazing coals. "Do you know what happens to men who lie to me?" The whispered threat made his captive's eyes go wide with terror. Bodies piled up across the city. Dante's reputation for ruthlessness reached new heights as he carved a path of destruction in his search. His own men exchanged worried glances when they thought he wasn't looking. They'd seen him angry before, seen him violent, but this was different. This was obsession given flesh and fury. In his office, Dante stared at maps of the city, read Michael's showing where they'd already searched. His usual immaculate appearance was gone, replaced by a man stripped raw by desperation. His tie hung loose, shirt sleeves rolled up to show arms stained with other men's blood. "Boss," Antonio entered without knocking, his face grim. 2 more locations cleared. Nothing. Dante's fist slammed into his desk. "She's out there somewhere. They're hiding her from me." His voice cracked slightly. "She has to be alive." Has to be. The night stretched endless, filled with interrogations and gunfire. Dante hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Nothing mattered but finding her. The city trembled under his rage, criminal empires scrambling to prove they weren't involved, desperate to avoid his wrath. Near dawn he stood in her room, fingers trailing over the silk sheets where they'd last lain together. The scent of her perfume still lingered, tormenting him with memories of soft skin and gentle touches. How had he let this happen? He'd sworn to protect her, and now... "Sir," Marco appeared in the doorway, tension vibrating through his frame. "We found something." A witness saw her being loaded into a car matching descriptions of Salvatore's fleet. Dante went very still, the kind of stillness that made hardened killers pray for mercy. Salvatore. The name was... a death sentence. The rival Don who's been pushing against our territory. "Yes, sir. Our sources confirm she's being held in his compound outside the city." The silence that followed was deafening. Dante turned slowly, and the look in his eyes made Marco step back involuntarily. This wasn't their controlled, calculating leader. This was something ancient and terrible, a predator awakened to violence. "Load every weapon we have," Dante commanded, his voice dropping to a growl that promised vengeance. "Call in every soldier, every assassin on our payroll." His hands flexed, already imagining the destruction to come. "Tonight we end this. Tonight I remind them why they used to call me Il Fantasma." He moved to his private armory, selecting weapons with lethal precision. Each gun, each knife was a promise of retribution. The thought of her alone, afraid, in enemy hands made his blood boil. He'd let her into his world, let her past his defenses, and now she was paying the price. "Sir," Marco ventured carefully, "Salvatore's compound is heavily fortified. We should plan." "No more planning." Dante checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "No more games. They took what's mine." His eyes met Marco's, and there was nothing human in them anymore. "So I'm going to take everything from them. Every life, every breath until she's back in my arms." The mansion erupted into controlled chaos as men armed themselves for war. Dante stood at the center of the storm, a dark angel of vengeance preparing to paint the night red. His only thought was her smile, her defiance, the way she'd seen past his monsters to find the man beneath. "Hold on, cara mia," he whispered to the dawn. "I'm coming for you." The concrete walls of the rival compound felt like they were closing in. Isabella huddled in the corner of her makeshift cell, arms wrapped around her knees. The bare light bulb above cast harsh shadows across the room, making the metal door seem even more imposing. Outside, boots scraped against pavement as guards made their rounds, their monotonous pacing, a grim reminder of her captivity. "You have to understand," her brother Michael pleaded from where he sat across the room. His familiar face was twisted with desperation, barely recognizable as the protective older brother she'd once known. "They threatened everyone I love. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," she whispered, voice raw from earlier screaming. Her wrists were rubbed red from the rope they'd used to bind her during transport. "You chose to betray Dante. To betray me." "Dante Moretti is a monster." Michael surged forward, hands outstretched. "Look what he's done to you, keeping you prisoner in that mansion, controlling your every move. I was trying to save you." Isabella laughed bitterly. "Save me? By having rival thugs drag me away? By helping them try to murder the man who..." She cut herself off, the word love dying in her throat. Even now, she couldn't admit how deep her feelings for Dante ran. "He'll kill me for this," Michael whispered, slumping against the wall. "You know he will." "Maybe you deserve it." The words came out harsh, but Isabella couldn't take them back. The brother she trusted was gone, replaced by this desperate stranger who'd sold them both out to Dante's enemies. A distant boom made them both freeze. Then another, closer this time. The concrete walls trembled, dust raining down from the ceiling. Isabella's heart leaped. She knew what this meant. Who this meant. "He's here," she breathed, hope blazing in her chest for the first time since her capture. Michael's face drained of color. Oh God. Gunfire erupted outside, accompanied by screams and the thunderous sound of more explosions. The guards' boots no longer paced. They were running, shouting orders that quickly turned to cries of pain. Isabella pressed herself against the wall, anticipation making her hands shake. The metal door flew open with a crash that made her jump. There he stood. Dante Moretti, the monster of her brother's warnings, and the man who'd claimed her heart. His expensive suit was splattered with blood, his dark eyes wild with rage and relief as they found her. Isabella. Her name was a growl on his lips as he strode forward, somehow even more dangerous in his concern than his fury. His hands cupped her face, checking for injuries, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "Always." The single word held volumes of promise and possession. Michael scrambled to his feet, backing away. "Moretti, please." Dante's body went rigid. Slowly, he He turned to face her brother, keeping Isabella partially shielded behind him. The traitor speaks. His voice was death itself, quiet and final. Wait! Isabella grabbed Dante's arm, feeling the coiled violence in his muscles. Please, Dante, he's still my brother. He betrayed us both. Dante snarled. He put you in danger. That alone signs his death warrant. Isabella moved to stand between them, hands pressed against Dante's chest. She could feel his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. I'm begging you, show mercy, just this once, for me. Dante's jaw clenched, war raging in his eyes as he looked down at her. Finally, he spoke through gritted teeth. Exile. He leaves the city tonight, never returns. If I ever see his face again, not even you will stop what happens next. Michael sagged in relief, but Isabella barely noticed. She was lost in Dante's gaze, seeing the magnitude of what he'd just done for her. This man who never showed mercy, who ruled through absolute power, had bent his own rules for her sake. Thank you, she whispered. Another explosion rocked the building, closer now. Dante's men were still fighting, clearing the compound. Without warning, Dante swept Isabella into his arms, cradling her against his chest. Your brother can find his own way out, he growled, striding toward the door. I'm taking you home. Dante, you're mine. His arms tightened possessively as he carried her through corridors littered with bodies, past walls scarred by bullets and fire. His voice was rough with emotion barely contained. Nothing will take you from me again. No one. Isabella buried her face in his neck, breathing in gunpowder and expensive cologne, feeling safer in this blood-soaked moment than she had anywhere else. Behind them, the compound burned, her brother fled, and an era of betrayal ended in flames. But in Dante's arms, she was already home. The morning light filtered through heavy curtains, casting a soft glow across Dante's opulent bedroom. She stirred beneath silk sheets, her body aching from the ordeal. Opening her eyes, she found Dante perched on the edge of the bed like a vigilant guardian. His white shirt was stained crimson, sleeves rolled up to reveal cuts and bruises. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his gaze remained fierce and alert as it fixed on her. You look terrible, she whispered, reaching out to touch a gash on his forearm. I haven't slept. His voice was rough, matching his disheveled appearance. Couldn't risk closing my eyes. Needed to make sure you were really here. She tried to sit up, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Dante's hands were instantly there, supporting her with a gentleness that contradicted his blood-stained appearance. The events of the night before crashed over her, the explosions, the gunfire, Dante cutting through enemies like an avenging angel. I thought, her voice cracked. I was afraid you wouldn't come. His expression darkened dangerously. You thought I would abandon you. No, she swallowed hard. I was afraid they would kill me before you could reach me, that I would die without seeing you again. Dante's hands tightened on her shoulders. Listen to me. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. If they had killed you, I would have burned every building in this city to the ground. I would have hunted every person involved, every family member, every connection. The world would have drowned in blood. The raw intensity in his words made her shiver. This was the man others feared, the monster they whispered about. But to her, his darkness felt like salvation. I've never been so scared, he admitted, the confession barely audible. When they took you, I couldn't think straight, couldn't breathe. The thought of losing you, he broke off, jaw clenching. She reached for him, pulling him closer until their foreheads touched. His breath was warm against her lips, hands sliding into her hair. The first kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, but it quickly blazed into something desperate and consuming. Dante growled low in his throat as she pulled at his shirt, needing to feel his skin. He helped her remove the blood-stained fabric, revealing the map of fresh bruises across his muscled chest. She traced each Michael with trembling fingers, remembering how he had fought for her. Mine, he muttered against her throat, teeth grazing sensitive skin. Say it. Yours, she gasped as his hands roamed possessively over her body. I'm yours, Dante. Their coupling was frenzied, raw with need and relief. He pinned her beneath him, Michaeling her neck, her breasts, claiming every inch of her body as if to erase the memory of their separation. She met his passion with equal fervor, nails raking down his back, wanting to leave her own Michaels on him. Dante's control shattered completely when she wrapped her legs around his waist, drawing him deeper. He groaned her name like a prayer, like salvation, his rhythm becoming desperate and erratic. She clung to him as pleasure built between them, wave after crashing wave until they both shattered. Afterward, They lay tangled in sweat-dampened sheets, her head resting on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat gradually slowing. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her spine, occasionally tightening as if to reassure himself she was still there. "I never thought one person could have this much power over me," he murmured into her hair. "You've made me weak." She lifted her head to meet his dark gaze. "No, I've made you stronger." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip. "That day in the cathedral, you walked into my funeral and refused to let me die. Now look at us." She remembered the panic she'd felt seeing his chest move beneath the coffin lid, the way she'd ignored armed guards to reach him. How different would both their lives be if she had stayed silent? Dante shifted, rolling them so she was beneath him again. His eyes burned with possession as he studied her face. "You stopped my funeral," he whispered against her lips. "You stopped my death." His kiss was deep, claiming, "Now you'll never stop me from being yours." She wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. Outside these walls, danger still lurked. There would be consequences for the night's bloodshed, rivals to face, power struggles to navigate. But here, in this moment, nothing existed except the weight of his body against hers and the promise in his words. They had found each other in death and chaos, forged their bond through violence and passion. Now, as morning light painted gold across their tangled limbs, she knew there was no going back. She belonged to him as completely as he belonged to her, a truth written in blood and sealed with desperate kisses. The morning sun streamed through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across marble floors that had seen both blood and beauty. 3 weeks had passed since the night Dante had torn apart the city to bring her home. Peace settled over the Moretti Empire like a thick blanket, but underneath lay the coiled readiness of a predator at rest. She walked the halls freely now, no longer shadowed by guards but protected by respect. The staff bowed their heads as she passed, not from fear but genuine deference. Even Dante's most hardened soldiers stepped aside, offering quiet ma'ams that carried the weight of acceptance. In his office, Dante stood at the window, cutting an imposing figure in a tailored black suit. He turned as she entered, his expression softening in that way reserved only for her. "Tonight's gathering," he said, reaching for her hand, "will change everything." "The other families are nervous," she replied, letting him pull her close. "Your return from the dead, the traitors exposed. The way you decimated the rival compound. They don't know what to expect." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Let them be nervous. Tonight, they'll understand exactly where you stand in this world." Hours later, she stood before the mirror in their bedroom, smoothing down the silk of her crimson dress. Dante appeared behind her, his reflection dark and dangerous, his hands settled on her hips, possessive even in private. "Beautiful," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck, and deadly. His fingers traced the outline of the small pistol concealed beneath her dress. After the kidnapping, he had insisted on teaching her to shoot, to defend herself. She'd learned quickly, driven by the memory of helplessness. The gathering was held in one of Dante's exclusive clubs, the kind where deals were made in shadows and alliances forged in whispers. As they descended the stairs together, conversations hushed. Every major family had sent representatives, some out of respect, others out of fear, all watching to see how power would shift. Dante's hand rested on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. His presence commanded attention, but tonight, all eyes were on her, the woman who had stopped Il Fantasma's funeral, who had survived betrayal and capture, who had somehow tamed the most feared dawn in the city. At the head of the room, Dante raised his glass. The silence became absolute. "Many of you wondered why I faked my death." His voice carried power and authority. "Now you know, to root out those who would betray us, to strengthen our family." His dark gaze swept the room. "And to find something I never knew I needed." He turned to her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "This woman saved my life, not once but twice. First at my funeral, then by giving me a reason beyond vengeance and power." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "She is not my guest. She is not my prisoner. She is my woman, my queen, my heart." Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through leaves. Some faces showed approval, others calculation. Everyone understood the significance. Dante Moretti, who trusted no one, had publicly declared his weakness. but in doing so, he had also announced his greatest strength. An old Don stepped forward, his face creased with respect. To the Don and his lady, he raised his glass. May your enemies tremble and your allies prosper. The toast echoed through the room. One by one, the families came forward to pay their respects. She stood beside Dante, matching his strength with her own quiet power. This was her world now, beautiful and brutal, dangerous and intoxicating. Later, as the gathering wound down, she caught snippets of conversation. Did you see how he looks at her? Never thought I'd see the day. Touch her and die, that's the new rule. Dante's arm tightened around her waist. They're learning, he murmured against her ear. The smart ones will understand that protecting you means earning my favor. The stupid ones. His smile was sharp as a blade. Well, they won't be problems for long. When they finally returned to the mansion, exhaustion settled over her like a heavy cloak. But as she moved to sit on their bed, Dante surprised her by kneeling before her. The most feared man in the city, on his knees, taking her hand in his. His lips brushed her knuckles, tender despite the violence those same lips had ordered. The world fears me, he said softly, dark eyes locked on hers. But only you own me. She traced his jaw with trembling fingers, feeling the strength and vulnerability in his submission. This was Dante Moretti, the monster, the protector, the man who had claimed her heart as thoroughly as she had claimed his. His hands slid up her thighs, bunching the silk of her dress. Let me worship you, he growled, all tenderness transformed to heat. Let me show you what it means to own a devil. She tangled her fingers in his hair, guiding his mouth to hers. Their kiss was fire, and possession, danger, and devotion. In this moment, the empire outside ceased to exist. There was only them, their passion, their unbreakable bond forged in death and sealed in blood. Dante rose, lifting her with him, laying her back against black silk sheets. His eyes burned with possession as he looked down at her. This was their truth. Beauty wrapped in brutality, tenderness born from violence, a love story written in bullet casings and whispered threats. As he claimed her mouth again, she knew this was there forever. The Don and his queen, ruling an empire built on fear but sustained by something far more powerful, a love that had stopped death itself. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.